A silent shift spread across small circles as people trained to receive direct impressions from extraterrestrials. This is how the network awakened. Before we begin, write in the comments where you're watching from and what you believe about extraterrestrial contact. There are moments in history that do not announce themselves with trumpets or headlines. They arrive like a change in air pressure, subtle and undeniable, carried by whispers that cross living rooms, kitchens, workshops, and long quiet roads at night. That was how this began, not as a proclamation, but as a silent shift in how people listened to the sky. For years, small circles of disciplined observers had been meeting under open horizons, learning how to sit still without demanding a spectacle, how to endure long stretches of quiet without declaring failure, how to pay attention without turning attention into performance. The talk was plain, the tools simple: notebooks, pencils that worked in the cold, red-filtered lights that preserved night vision, extra layers, water. The goal was simple too: teach the body and mind to be steady enough that, if the unknown drew near, the human instrument would not shake itself to pieces. The early phase was less about contact than about capacity. A person who has never trained their attention will reach for noise when faced with the unknown. So the circles practiced the basics that modern life tends to erode: slow inhalations through the nose, long exhalations that unwind the nervous system, the craft of noticing a detail without instantly narrating it, the discipline of writing before speaking so memory cannot be retrofitted to fit expectation. They learned how to anchor their bodies when heartbeats accelerated, how to widen vision to include the periphery, how to soften the jaw so the startle reflex had fewer places to hide. Nothing mystical, just skilled self-regulation rehearsed until reliable. The shift became visible when impressions began showing up in multiples. A shape of meaning would arrive, more like a geometric mood than a sentence, and 2 or 3 people would describe it with surprising overlap. Someone would feel warmth gather along the forearms just as another recorded a low bone-deep tone, like an instrument being tuned somewhere inside the chest. Above them, lights behaved like ideas freed from inertia, stopping too cleanly, changing direction with impossible economy, vanishing and reappearing without the arcs that aircraft trace. Logs taken in separate hands began to rhyme. The circles had always been careful to avoid conclusion chasing, but they could not ignore patterns that returned with disciplined regularity. What changed everything was the decision to distribute responsibility. Instead of concentrating the work in a single place or personality, the circles multiplied and diversified. Experienced participants mentored newcomers, not as authorities, but as steady hands. Protocols traveled without branding: begin with breath, settle the mind, open peripheral vision, note sensations without drama, log data in common formats so comparisons mean something. The result was an informal network that worked like mycelium: quiet, resilient, and excellent at moving resources where needed without demanding attention to itself. Because the network refused spectacle, people who arrived seeking a show usually did not stay. Those who remained learned a different reward: the texture of presence when the familiar thins and the unknown draws close. Some nights nothing unusual happened, and that was fine. The quiet itself sharpened attention. On other nights the world tilted. Insects fell silent as if a dial had been turned. A luminous point appeared at the horizon and held its place against wind and reason. A cool evening pressed warm against the skin with no source. A sense of being, looked at, spread through the body in a way that felt like memory rather than gaze. By this stage the premise felt less like belief and more like engineering. If you can stabilize the human instrument, falling heart rate, longer exhale, wider awareness, you can present it to the unknown without begging for rescue or proof. The unknown, in turn, can present itself without breaking the instrument. That was the deeper wager behind the quiet shift, not that fireworks would descend, but that a conversation could begin in a species capable of hearing without fleeing and seeing without claiming more than it saw. Safeguards kept the work honest. The circles maintained a rule against naming places, people, and organizations in their logs. The goal was to protect privacy and prevent hero stories from forming around individuals. They cataloged false positives with the same care as luminous anomalies, satellites mistaken for signals, aircraft lining up for distant runways, meteors smearing across the atmosphere, even insect swarms throwing strange reflections in certain conditions. To train discernment, they would deliberately watch known satellite trains, step outside during meteor showers, and log high-altitude traffic so their instincts learned to subtract the ordinary first. They also practiced paired attention. Two people silently track the same patch of sky, then write separate accounts before a group comparison. Agreement was never treated as proof, but as a filter against the distortions of storytelling. When reports aligned, the stop too sudden, the turn too clean, the vanishing without trail, the circle added weight to the event. When they diverged, they learned from the divergence. Either way, the human instrument was being refined. Over months, the quiet shift developed its own rhythm. People arrived as strangers and left as contributors to a field larger than themselves. The question around which everything revolved was simple: can a conversation between species be grown the way a craft is learned, through patience, iteration, humility, and care? The answer was not shouted, but it was lived. And in the living of it, participants found that ordinary life began to change as well: sharper attention at work, calmer responses during conflict, fewer episodes of late-night anxiety, more ease with not knowing. The training necessary for contact turned out to be the training necessary for being human under pressure. The first time multiple circles realized they had witnessed the same sequence on the same night, the effect was less triumph than quiet awe. In separate regions, under different weather and terrain, groups recorded a triad of lights that rose from the horizon, formed a clean triangle, and held there with a stillness that mocked wind and turbulence. Minutes later the points folded into one, and dimmed not like a retreating object but like a lamp being lowered behind milk glass. The logs that surfaced a day later were anonymized. No names, no coordinates, yet the sequences matched with unnerving precision. The network had always warned against story drift. But this was not drift. It was convergence. During the following months, shared patterns accelerated. Participants who had never met described dreams with architectural precision: a vast circular hall filled with a soft radiance that hid its source, a floor etched with symbols that felt both unfamiliar and intimate, a sense of being coached without words to stand a certain way, feet grounded, chin level, shoulders quiet, while a wave of meaning moved through the body from crown to heel. Some woke trembling and peaceful at once, the paradox that often follows encounters with something at once other and near. Others woke with the sensation that they had studied rather than slept, as if a lesson had passed across the mind in a language learned by the skin first, and only later by thought. Not all expressions were visual. On certain nights a low tone bled through the ground before any light appeared. People likened it to a bowed string inside the earth or to a faraway turbine humming at the threshold of hearing. When the tone came, the air often tasted metallic, a detail so odd and consistent it became a checkbox in the logs. Elsewhere, a warm pressure rolled across cheeks and forearms as though sunlight had crossed the sky in an instant. In cold seasons, the contrast made strong hearts shake. Through it all the circles refused theater. If a person cried, they were given space without spotlight. If someone shook, a guide sat beside them and coached breath rather than offering grand explanations. The work was to metabolize the unknown, not to glamorize it. What surprised many newcomers was how mundane the protocols looked: pens, notebooks, red-filtered lights to preserve night vision, simple blankets against the cold, water, and timings noted with patient precision. Those tools held the moment open long enough for meaning to arrive on its own schedule. And you? Have you ever felt a coincidence deepen into something else? A dream shared across distance? A light that moved as if it knew you were watching? A feeling that addressed you directly? Share it in the comments below. I'd love to read your experience. Skeptical questions were not enemies. They were instruments. Could a satellite explain this movement? Could a plane on approach create that hover? Might the triangle be 3 high-altitude aircraft seen at odd angles? The circles did not bristle at such challenges. They tested them. They learned regional flight patterns, checked satellite passes, watched meteor showers on purpose to inoculate themselves against misreading them later. What remained after subtraction was not blank, it was concentrated. The interior training matured alongside the external methods. Participants practiced widening attention until the whole dome of the sky felt held at once, then narrowing it to a pencil point without losing the rest. They rehearsed what to do when terror flickered: open the jaw, soften the belly, lengthen the exhale. They learned to let surprise pass through the body instead of bracing against it. When impressions arrived, images without pictures, messages without words, they wrote first, spoke second, leaving their language less likely to terraform memory. Over time, a new vocabulary emerged that avoided the traps of certainty. People stopped saying, "I know," and started saying, "I noticed." They traded arguments for correlations, proclamations for patterns. They learned that wonder requires boundaries as much as openness, that credulity collapses a mystery as surely as contempt does, and that the most respectful stance toward the unknown is rigorous curiosity. That stance, neither defensive nor naive, became the ethos of the silent shift gaining speed across the mapless network. One of the most studied nights became a template for careful comparison. In the late hours, several circles separated by vast distance each recorded a glow rising from the same compass point relative to their own positions. The azimuths differed, but the timing lined up within a small window. In each location, observers marked the moment when insects fell silent, and when a barely audible vibration seemed to tighten the skin along the forearms. The light rose, stopped, and appeared to dilate without growing larger, a phenomenon the logs called brightness without size. Minutes later, faint points winked into existence near the first and arranged themselves with geometric economy, as if intention could be graphed. After the event, teams applied a cold read protocol. Each circle uploaded anonymized excerpts, times, headings, durations, sensations, without commentary or summary. A separate team collated the fragments, and only later revealed which notes belonged together. The result was not spectacle but pattern, independent observers describing sequences that matched beyond chance. Where discrepancies appeared, they were catalogued as artifacts of position or weather rather than dismissed. The exercise trained everyone to prefer accuracy over story. Dream work followed similar rules. People wrote within minutes of waking, before speaking to anyone, to reduce contamination by conversation. Later, during comparisons, facilitators looked for structural rather than decorative similarities. The sequence of spaces, the quality of light, the posture the dream seemed to teach. When two accounts matched in scaffolding but not in surface detail, the circles treated the match as meaningful. When dreams echoed exactly down to adjectives, the group grew cautious. Too similar can be a sign of echo, not authenticity. Behind the logistics lived the heart of the thing, a growing sense that the visitors were less interested in proving themselves than in shaping a human capacity for meeting them. The lights could have been brighter, the displays louder, the signatures easier to capture on camera. Instead, the phenomena seemed tuned to the threshold between obvious and deniable, as if to train discernment, patience, and cooperation all at once. The message implicit in the method was clear: if we can learn to meet subtlety with steadiness, more will be given. As the circles multiplied, the network learned to protect itself from the distortions that growth can bring. There were no uniforms, no charismatic stages, no rank titles. Guidance was carried in plain language and checklists: arrive early, test your lights, check weather, agree on hand signals for silence and for logging, establish the edge of the safe perimeter, define how long to remain after an event, decide in advance who will lead the comparison and who will timekeep. These simple agreements diffused authority and replaced it with competence. Ethics were as practical as the notebooks. The network maintained anonymity as a structural principle. No lists of names. No maps of locations. No calendars published for spectators. The purpose was to protect the people involved and keep attention on the practice rather than personalities. If a person insisted on fame, they were kindly invited to practice elsewhere. If a person sought to monetize the gatherings, they were thanked for their time and released. The unknown was not a commodity to be cut into saleable pieces. It was a relationship to be met with dignity. Training materials remained humble. A short guide explained how to distinguish high-altitude aircraft from unusual light, how satellites behave, what meteor showers look like at different speeds, why certain weather patterns can produce strange glows near the horizon, and how to account for the tricks of fatigue at 3 in the morning. Rather than weakening the case for contact, this grounded knowledge strengthened it. Participants learned to subtract prosaic explanations first, leaving the residue of events that still refused ordinary boxes. Over time, the interior curriculum deepened. People practiced wide soft vision, allowing attention to hold the whole sky without locking on a single point, and micro-precise vision for moments when a narrow beam of noticing mattered. They rehearse breathing drills to stabilize heart rhythms and practice posture that keeps the body ready without becoming rigid. They learn to greet sudden fear as a wave that passes rather than a wall that blocks. Some circles practice brief standing movements to discharge adrenaline after an event so memories could settle without the jitter of undigested shock. The communication that mattered most still arrived as resonance rather than sentences. An entire group would feel a brightening in mood without cause. Moments later a light would appear. Someone would feel an include everyone impulse just before another person suggested changing the circle's orientation so all had clear views. At first these coincidences felt eerie. Later they felt natural, like muscles remembering how to work together after a long time in a cast. The point was not to attribute every good idea to the sky, but to notice how cooperation improved the odds of something meeting them halfway. For all the discipline, joy was not absent. Laughter often broke the tension after long periods of quiet. People discovered a companionship rare in other parts of life. The intimacy of shared stillness, the relief of being with others who prefer precision over drama, the kindness of being believed without being flattered. When nothing happened, they shared thermoses and stories. When something happened, they shared the wordless satisfaction of having been ready together. That joy, too, became part of the signal, evidence that the practice was humanizing rather than hollowing. Quick pause. If this way of working with the unknown resonates with you, patient, careful, and collaborative, drop a comment and follow the channel so these stories can reach others who value rigor as much as wonder. Mistakes still occurred, and the culture welcomed them as lessons. A lens flare once fooled an enthusiastic newcomer. The next week the circle ran a drill just on optics. A distant helicopter mimicked a hovering light. The circle built a sound library to train the ear. A cluster of satellites produced odd angles that imitated intention. Afterward, participants added a satellite pass check to the pre-brief. Each error was folded back into the training so confidence grew from reality, not from denial. Archiving matured alongside practice. Because public databases invited the wrong kind of attention, the network maintained private, anonymized repositories where logs could be time-synced against astronomical data and air traffic records without exposing identities. A rotating team, never the same people twice, performed audits to keep enthusiasm from outpacing caution. When a run of events looked impressive, the auditors asked dull questions. Were clocks synchronized? Did fatigue cluster around the outliers? Was any language copied from prior reports? Dull questions, bright clarity. Care for participants became part of the design. Not everyone finds the boundary between awe and fear easy to navigate. After intense nights, circles held debriefs focused on the body. Drink water, eat something warm, notice where tension hides, sleep, and avoid filling silence with theory. People who struggled with nightmares were paired with steady partners who checked in without prying. The promise was simple: no one has to muscle through alone. When inner storms calmed, meaning tended to arrive on its own. Newcomers were taught that play and rigor can coexist. A light-hearted drill might involve describing the sky badly, to make room for actual noticing. Another asked people to narrate clouds as if they were landmarks, an exercise that stripped away the romance of vagueness and replaced it with the habit of description, altitude guesses, movement, edges, gradients, rates of change. The result was a culture allergic to both superstition and swagger, practical enough to carry blankets and wonder at once. And in the center of that culture, the original impulse remained unchanged: make the human instrument worthy of a conversation with the unknown. The network did not worship the lights. It prepared for the day the lights might ask for something more from us than open mouths, composure, clarity, cooperation. Whether that day arrives at noon or always at the edge of night, the work has value now: better attention, better kindness, better steadiness. These are useful even if the sky stays quiet. They are essential if it does not. The night many now refer to simply as the hinge did not begin with any omen. The air was ordinary cool, the horizon a clean line, the moon a thin suggestion. Multiple circles, unaware of one another's schedules, settled into practice at roughly the same hour. What followed unfolded like a choreography designed to test everything the network had built: attention, restraint, courage, humility. In one place, a faint luminescence pooled just above the ground as if dew had learned to glow. In another, a point rose from the horizon and drifted into the upper dark like a bead on an invisible string. Elsewhere, 3 small lights stepped out of the background stars and began moving with a deliberateness that felt less like travel than like presence choosing where to be. In the first location, the glow gathered into a bead and rose until it hovered well above the tree line. No sound, no draft, no rotor wash bending leaves. Only the sense that gravity had been asked to wait. In the second, the points locked into an equilateral shape and held as steady as pinpricks in glass. In the third, the sudden silencing of nightlife was so complete that a participant began to cry, not from fear, but from the unnerving totality of quiet. Each circle logged times, azimuths, durations, and bodily sensations with the discipline of people who had rehearsed for this exact kind of bewilderment. What made the night a hinge was not brightness or proximity but coherence. When anonymized logs were later compared, sequences lined up in a way that resisted convenient dismissal. The hum arrived within the same 2-minute window across regions. The pressure along the forearms and behind the eyes rose and fell in similar arcs. The triangle held for nearly the same duration before collapsing to a single point. Even discrepancies helped refine the picture. A low marine layer here, a patch of high thin cloud there, small factors that explained certain angles without canceling the core alignment. The morning after, people went to work, made meals, fixed small broken things, and answered ordinary messages. This, too, was part of the ethic: keep your life intact. No one was crowned. No exploitative headlines appeared because there was nothing public to exploit. Instead, the circles quietly strengthened their commitments. They updated protocols, clarified checklists, and circulated reminders that wonder is not a substitute for rest. Underlined 3 times in one guide was a simple sentence: drink water before you explain anything. Some circles began experimenting with mass resonance exercises, simple, synchronized actions intended to act like tuning forks across distance. At an agreed minute, each group would breathe in the same pattern for 60 seconds, hold a posture for 60 more, then soften their gaze until the sky felt like a single dome held in common. No lights were demanded, no results were promised. Yet on several nights, participants later reported a shared brightening of mood followed by a brief appearance along the horizon, as if an orchestra had tuned to the same pitch and a note responded. Practical imagination extended into education. People taught their children how to name clouds and listen for birds, how to sit still for 90 seconds without turning stillness into punishment, how to breathe when frightened rather than bold. No one taught beliefs. They taught skills that would be honorable for any future: how to notice kindly, how to speak precisely, how to disagree without contempt. If the visitors ever asked what we had prepared, these were answers the community could offer without apology. Months later, when auditors sampled logs again, they found fewer extravagant claims and more precise observations. The culture had tilted decisively toward clarity. Participants no longer rushed to label an event as extraordinary. They described what occurred and let patterns speak over time. Paradoxically, this restraint made the anomalous more visible. When something truly violated the normal, it stood out against a background of meticulous honesty like a bright shape on clean paper. By then, a tentative understanding had taken root about the visitors' method. They seemed to prefer thresholds to finishes, invitations to declarations. The phenomena rarely leapt beyond plausible deniability for the casual onlooker, yet routinely crossed the lines the trained could draw. It was as if the contact were designed not to coerce belief, but to cultivate capacity. A species too easily shocked might riot under a sky filled with impossible light. A species that can remain lucid in ambiguity can learn. The hinge did not convert everyone, and that was never the aim. It refined the craft. It told those who had invested years of quiet work that the investment mattered, and it told those arriving that there was a path worth walking that did not require surrendering intellect. The message many took from the night was modest and immense at once: keep going. Prepare more people. Teach steadiness. Share tools. Avoid spectacle. Guard anonymity. Let the lights remain themselves without forcing them into the size of our stories. If a day comes when contact steps into the middle of noon, the people who practiced in the margins will be the ones who recognize the rhythm beneath the astonishment. If that day never comes, the practice will have given them and those around them something that civilizations rarely regret: citizens with calmer hands, clearer attention, and the ability to meet uncertainty without panic. Either way, the sky has already altered us. We learn to listen together. We learn to record without exaggerating and to compare without competing. We learn that being ready is not a mood you wait to feel. It is a craft you build with others until it holds. If this story caught your attention, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those who are also fascinated by UFOs. And leave your thoughts in the comments. What do you think really happened?